So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Commanded October webinar. It is a pleasure to be here. So my name is Valerie Taylor, and I'm the CEO and president of Commanded, the Center for Minorities and People with Disabilities in IT. And I'm also the division director of mathematics and computer science at Argonne National Laboratory. And it is my wonderful pleasure to have our panelists here today to actually talk about their this year, July 2024 article in the Communications of the ACM on visualizing progress and broadening participation in computing and the value of context. Very much important. So we have our panelists here, the authors of the paper, who include Valerie Barr with Bard College. We have Carla Brodley with Northeastern University, and Manuel Pérez-Quiñones with University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So it's a wonderful pleasure. I've known all three for quite some time, so it's just a pleasure to see you here today and to talk about your paper. And I just have to give a little bit of background. When I read the paper in July, when CACM came out, which was the first part of July, I was like, oh, we have to talk about this. This is so important in terms of the context, because everybody looks at data in a standard way. So the discussion around context is so important, but I won't give away the details. So what we'll do today is we're here first to hear a short presentation about the paper. So that will provide an opportunity for us to have context for our discussion. And then I'll start with a few questions and then open it up to the audience for additional questions. And what we'll do in terms of the questions from the audience, we try to keep this interactive, and that is what we want is please use raise hand. If you don't have raise hand, which is actually under, I think, react with the little heart is a raise hand. But if you don't have that on your Zoom, then please send me a text and I can point you out, and then you can actually unmute and also turn on your video and then go from there to ask your question. So that's what we're looking at today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, and let me just say, everyone, I should say Dr. Valerie Barr, Dr. Carla Brodley, Dr. Manuel Pérez-Quiñones. So sorry about that, all PhDs, but I've known for so long, I just use first names. So they are PhDs and doctors. But we're having this great conversation about visualizing broadening participation. So I'm going to turn it over to Manuel, Carla, and Valerie. So Valerie's going to start the presentation and then we'll have our questions. So with that, Valerie, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's really wonderful for us to be here. And let me just get the slides. Whoops. Yeah, it's only been how many years that we do this? All right. You should be seeing the title slide. Okay, good. So this is the title of the paper. And really the key points that we tried to make in the paper are that we can, as Valerie said, picture the broadening participation data differently than it has been done for what feels like time immemorial. And in particular, the key points we want to make are that the denominator you use when you look at data really matters, that your university demographic context really matters, and that intersectionality matters. And so we're going to work through these three parts, and I'm going to take the first part and probably go on the longest, for which, I'm not going to apologize in advance. So I take a view that when we are looking at broadening participation data, we have to consider the cohort that we're looking at. And so I want to give a quick introduction to what I mean by that. And then I'm going to go through an example that is not in the paper, and it has to do with STEM more broadly, not just computer science, but I think it should be hopefully a real lesson in why this kind of analysis is so important. So this is kind of the way we all, for decades, have been looking at data about computer science. This is the line that shows of all degrees in computer science, what percentage were earned by women. And so I feel like everybody in computer science knows this picture, like we see it when we're sleeping. The blue line is of all math degrees, the percentage earned by women. And you're all muted, but I want you to just think for a second, what do you think this tells you about how women study math relative to computer science? Okay, so now you've had that moment. This picture is totally useless for longitudinal comparison, longitudinal evaluation of what's happening in these disciplines, because it doesn't account for changes in the size of the cohort of women and the size of the cohort of men. And I will say for all three of us, we are stuck using federal categories, which is why we have only men and women, and we only have the federal race and ethnicity categories. So what I did instead is said, let's look at women's degrees. And let's ask the question of all women's degrees, what percentage are earned in computer science? What percentage are earned in math? And that gives us a very different picture, which is that basically both disciplines for a long time have been down here at about 1% of women's degrees. And just in the last couple of years, women have started trending upward a little bit in computer science. So this is a very different way of thinking about what's going on. And if I added physical sciences, we would see that they are also in the toilet bowl. Another quick example is actually after we presented at Tapia a couple of years ago, some friends came up to me and said, but Valerie, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Black computer science degrees are falling. And so again, here we have, of all degrees in computer science, what percentage are earned by Black African-American students? What percentage are earned by Hispanic students? This way of looking at it totally does not take into account that there's been a huge change in the percentage of the population that is Hispanic. So if we instead ask the question of all Hispanic degrees, what percentage are in computer science? Of all Black degrees, what percentage are in computer science? We see that actually both groups are improving. So this is good news, which we totally do not see if we look at this data in the conventional way. So what I want to do, and it shouldn't take more than maybe 5 minutes, is take you on a little analysis journey that started for me this summer when the Chronicle of Higher Education ran this article which focuses on the Meyerhoff program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the summer boot camp that they do for students. The Meyerhoff program is a program intended to encourage Black students to major in STEM and to help them be successful in majoring in STEM. Now I'm going to give true confessions. I didn't actually read the full article until about 3 weeks ago, because when I saw this in July, I was completely sidetracked by this graph they had in the article. And it took me a long time to understand it because it's very problematic. So I'll give you the quick explanation. What this graph is showing you is of all PhDs, STEM PhDs earned by Black graduate students in the time period 2010 to 2020, regardless of where they earned those degrees, 157 of those did their undergraduate work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where the Meyerhoff program is. 133 did their undergraduate at North Carolina A&T, 121 at Spelman. And I looked at this, ignoring the article, and I said, I do not know how to interpret this because I don't know the size of every school on this list, but I do know that the University of Maryland, Baltimore County is bigger than Spelman. And so how am I supposed to understand from this how likely it is that a Spelman STEM major will go on for a PhD compared to a Black STEM major at University of Maryland, Baltimore County? And how am I going to answer that question? Because this is not telling me anything useful. So I started down this little journey, trying to model good exploratory data analysis for my students. And I said, first of all, I need to understand the sizes of these schools. So you'll see I've got numbers next to the name of each school. And that's just so you can kind of track them as I re-rank them in different graphs. So here we've got the size, the relative size of the institutions. So University of Florida is huge. University of Baltimore, University of Maryland, Baltimore County is down here in the middle. It's a quarter the size of the University of Florida. And here's Spelman and Morehouse down here at the bottom. Small, residential, 2,000 plus. So now I was really wondering, so how do I compare the 157 students who went on to PhDs from UMBC and the 121 from Spelman? I mean, UMBC is 5 times the size of Spelman. Then I said, okay, I know what this graph is going to look like, but let me go ahead and show the percentage of the student body that is Black African American. Okay, it is not a surprise that the HBCUs are at the top. But what jumped out at me down here is that except for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, at every one of these other schools, the percentage of the student body that is Black is smaller and in some cases way below the national average. So that's just a little factoid to stick in the back of your head in this whole discussion that's been happening lately about the impact of the ban on affirmative action, because all this data is from before that. Okay, so then I said, of the Black students who are there as undergrads, what percentage of their degrees are in STEM? Because what I was trying to work my way toward is, what's the denominator I'm going to use? So here we have Black STEM undergraduate degrees as a percentage of Black degrees at these institutions. Well, not a surprise that MIT is at the top because the vast majority of their degrees awarded to everybody are STEM degrees. So, just again, nothing definitive here. This didn't help answer my original question. And then I said, okay, so if I want to understand, if I want to be able to compare, I'm a Black student going to one of these schools majoring in STEM, what's the likelihood I will go on for a PhD? How am I going to do that? How am I going to understand that? And so I made 2 assumptions. I assumed that if you got a STEM PhD, you had a STEM undergrad. That's our pipeline. And I arbitrarily decided it was a 5-year PhD journey. So if you got your PhD in 2010 to 2020, which is the period the Chronicle looked at, you did your undergrad between 2005 and 2015. So my denominator was all Black STEM undergraduate degrees earned 2005 to 2015 at this set of schools. And my numerator was the number of students who went on to the PhD. And this gives us a complete re-ranking of the schools. Interestingly, University of Maryland, Baltimore County does come out on top. So the way to understand this is to think, if you took 100 Black STEM undergrads, 2005 to 2015, from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, 13 of them would have a PhD 5 years later, and 11 from Spelman. So now I actually have a way to really understand how these schools compare, how they are preparing students to go on for the PhD in a particular cohort without being confused by relative size. Now, you've by now forgotten what the original graph said. So here we have the original list and the re-ranked list. And what I highlighted some of the schools. So the ones highlighted in orange are schools that looked good in the original graph the Chronicle of Higher Ed did, but actually are not doing as good a job at preparing their Black STEM undergrads to go on for the PhD. But some schools actually are doing a really good job and didn't look like it in the Chronicle's way of examining the data. And so to me, this is the power of this cohort analysis, because it kind of erases these huge differences that can exist because the institution sizes are so different and the relative student body demographics are so different. And with that, Carla.
Thanks, Valerie. And I'll just say there's one other thing there, though, and it ties directly into the talk that I'm going to give right now, the little tiny snippet, which is it's also relevant how well, like MIT and, another one that was high up that is not an HBCU is the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. How well are they doing in attracting African-American students? Because you can imagine if you have exactly one and that person goes to get a PhD, you're doing really well. So
Right.
you still have to think about it in that context, which gets me to what I want to talk about. You've all seen this graph for every race and ethnicity that is defined in IPEDS. I'm showing on the left the percentage of people who identify as men, and on the right, the percentage of people who identify as women who are in zip code 11, which is computer science. So you can see that in every category, there are fewer women than there are men. Next slide, Valerie. But it's irrelevant until we understand the population of what we're looking at. So now I'm showing with the transparent bar graduates of all degrees in the United States. So if we look, for example, at the second set of bars to the left, we can see that Asian American men are incredibly overrepresented with respect to who goes to with respect to the Asian American men that go to university. And in this case, Asian American women are right around par in terms of who goes to university. And that in every other category, except for non-resident alien, women are severely underrepresented with respect to who goes to university. Now, the reason why this is important is in the work that I do with the Center for Inclusive Computing, we work with universities very directly to try to have them understand that these national statistics are interesting, but what's really different is where in the country these universities are located really changes the underlying demographics of who's at their university. And what we would expect from a university, for example, that is in Southern California is very different than what we would expect for a university that is in the upper Midwest in terms of Hispanic students. And if you go to the next slide, Valerie. So this is an HSI in Southern California, which has a lot of Hispanic students. And you can see that Hispanic men in terms of computer science are overrepresented, and Hispanic women are woefully underrepresented. And this is an HSI. So what we would expect from this university in terms of their opportunity of how many Hispanic women could be doing computer science is really different than, like I said, a university in the upper Midwest, where that transparent gray bar representing women in the university would be a lot lower. Maybe the underrepresentation would be the same, but the magnitude of the opportunity would be much lower. And so one of the things that we do when the CIC works with schools is we show them this opportunity gap that they have and talk about, well, why is there such a difference and what's going on and how can we fix the program and remove institutional barriers that are causing this really skewed distribution. So here, when a university is thinking about how well they're doing, tracking even for one given year, so this does not track things over time, for any given snapshot, they should be looking at how their representation in various majors is influenced by the representation at their university. As one last example, at one point, the chair of a tech university shared with me that they were at 22% women in computer science, which was the national average, a little bit better than the national average. And she said, but we're only 33% women overall in our university. Whereas in this country, 57% of people who go to university identify as women. So that means that in another school that has a majority of women students, that 22% is a lot worse. And so it's a way to understand yourself in the context of your university. And it's also a way to understand how well is your university doing, because looking at how well you're doing compared to the national average only makes sense if you have the exact same distribution as the national average of who's college going. The final reason that this is important is because computer science departments can do a lot of things to think about what they're doing to create this difference in distribution, but often they have no say over who's admitted to their university, just like they can't change what location their university is in. But they have a lot of control over how they offer computer science and what kinds of barriers they might have unintentionally or intentionally been putting up. Now on to Manuel. Manuel?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. I had a situation at work similar to what just described. At one point, we were looking at the data in our university, and we had like 20% dropout rate of women in our major in the first year. And you know, we put in all kinds of mentoring programs and women in computing and all these initiatives. And it was later that I realized, wait, 40% of the women in our program were women of color. And we had not considered, are the women that are dropping out white women, Asian women, Latina, Black? And that context changes everything, right? It might not be an issue that it was women that were leaving. It might be that it was women of color predominantly leaving. So it just changes the problem completely. And it makes all the initiatives we were trying sort of probably pointless if you weren't addressing the needs of a particular population that was having it. So, and right around that time, I was talking to Carla. I was actually working for Carla in a sabbatical, and we had this conversation, and she brought in Valerie, and I had read Valerie's article from a few years back, and we started down this journey. And one of the things that I coincidentally found was a metric of diversity that the census had put out. And turns out there are all kinds of metrics of diversity, from population segregation, biodiversity in ecological systems. It's like, why aren't we using this metric? So there are lots of them. The one that I'm going to show you, and it's discussed in the article, is one that is called evenness. And the idea is that you have a single metric. As a matter of fact, there's a quote in the paper that says, what is needed is a single index that does more than simply count how many ethnicities exist in a data set, but instead takes account the relative population size of those different ethnicities. So there is one metric, the Shannon Information Index or Entropy Index, which we discussed in the paper, that basically measures and gives you a number up to 100%. 100% means all the groups in the population are evenly divided. So if you're looking at gender, and again, we're using IPEDS data, so it's only 2. If you're looking at gender, 100% means there's 50-50. If you're looking at race and ethnicity, the classifications that IPEDS provides is 7 of them. So it'd be all 7 of them would have the same number. And looking at intersectionality means there's 14 groups. The metric allows you to now compare how evenly distributed your students are. This chart you're seeing is a university in North Carolina, which wouldn't take much for you to figure out which one it is. If you look at the gender, which is the blue circle, it's sort of been flip-flopping around, 65%, goes up and down a little bit. You're like, oh, we're not doing great. We need to do better. But if you look at race and if you look at intersectionality, you realize our college is getting more diverse, including within the female group, where we get more women of color, and while enrollment is going through the roof, so that we're not necessarily having fewer female students, we have more distributed across different ethnicities and races. And so it paints a different picture. If you look at just gender, the line just looks almost flat. It started at 65 and ended at 67 over a 10-year period. You would go like, oh my God, we're not doing anything. But if you look at race, we started at 36 and we're at 67. And if you look intersectionally, we started at 43 and we're at 66.8. So this tells you a very different picture. It captures the relative size of the groups in the major, and it allows you to plot it over time in a way that sort of you can have a sense that it's working or not working, etc. Next slide. This one is that on the left is the gender and race from the previous slide, but I'm showing the distribution for race on the right-hand side for you to get a sense of why that line is going up. If you look at the top 2010, you see that 79% of our students were white students. In 2019, that number has gone down to 53%. And again, gone down to 53% while still increasing, because the degree at the top, you see that there were 78 degrees in CS in 2010. There's 516 in 2019. So the population is clearly getting more diverse. The changes of population growth, of who comes to college and all of that, is impacting who's studying computing. And if we go by sort of a simple metric that doesn't capture those changes, we miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. Next slide. You can skip this one. This is more of the same, and it's just a lot of, okay. So I wanted to sort of start thinking, well, are we doing better for one group than the other? And the metrics here, again, are looking at distribution of population, how even they are. So the blue boxes are gender, and as Carla and Valerie both mentioned, most campuses are 50-50. So those numbers that you see there are almost 100%, because all degrees on our campus, or all the North Carolina campuses, these are all 12 different universities in North Carolina, are close to 100%. As a matter of fact, those that are a little lower because they have more women than men. So the metric sort of comes down because it's not evenly distributed. So we're doing great on campus in terms of equality for gender. If you start looking at race and intersectionality, the number starts going down a little bit. But this allows you to see sort of the gap, sort of how well are we doing in terms of racial composition on our campus when compared to gender composition on our campus, so that you can then decide we need to put in programs that address issues of intersectionality rather than just gender or race, but instead address them both. By the way, if you look at the green diamond, the group that's doing the best on North Carolina is Duke. Again, sort of like the example that on the first set of charts, like MIT, Duke attract probably really, really good students and has the flexibility, being a private institution, to manage their admissions in ways that, they can do whatever they want to do. And as a result, they are more evenly divided across campus than some of the public campuses. Another thing to point out, the lowest scores on the orange circles are all HBCUs because they're predominantly Black. So yeah, the score is low, but it's not a bad thing. It's the context is missing in this metric, but this gives you a sense of how close or far apart are from reaching parity in this institution. So I think it's important that we try to come up with metrics that allows us to have sort of conversations. I don't think this is the best metric yet, but I think this is much better than what we had in the past, where we always, wait, are those women of color? or are those white women, or, you know, so this tries to capture the whole picture in one. And I think that's the end of my slides. Yeah.
Back. Okay, now I'm back. I think I was muted initially. So this was great. So I thank you. And so I know everybody's coming back, so let me give a moment for the spotlight to be on all four. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. So I want to start. So this was great. And, you know, we do go the standard way of looking at those plots. So that first plot that you displayed, Valerie, is the norm. And I was looking at that plot going, yes, you know, here's what this means. And you kind of go, but your second plot really helps to interpret that, especially because of the denominator. And I think having a common denominator in that sense really helped to understand the numerator numbers. Because oftentimes we just focus on the raw numerator without understanding the denominator. And then we give these percentages and we don't even give the denominator. So I want to ask the question, so really emphasize the importance of the denominator. So how do you determine what that denominator should be? You know, so for example, if you're using all of the degrees within computing or using all the degrees within engineering or at the university or across the field. So how, I guess, you know, if a person is looking at this, what advice would you give for identifying the denominator and what conditions and what like if you're doing the analysis having the same denominator, but what should it be? So let me stop there.
Well, and it's a great question, and I think it really depends on, you know, what's the question you're trying to answer? Because you know, we have focused for so long in computing on not just that standard view of it with the standard denominator, but also we haven't done anything intersectional. So I'll, when I'm done talking, I'll put in the chat a link to the app that I built with one of my students, which lets you, for any Title IX, Title IV school in the country, any zip code, any institution. I mean, you can go in and slice and dice race and ethnicity, gender, bachelor's, master's, PhD. So you can sit there and play to your heart's content. So I can tell you really interesting things like up until about 2021, Black women studied English literature at a higher rate than they studied computer science. So you can go in, you can look at any combination of disciplines, you can drill deep into your school. I will just caution, if you are at a small school, it's kind of useless because the numbers are just too small. But if you're looking at a university, you can go to town. We'll pull in exactly the zip codes that your school files with the federal government. You can compare to institutions. So I've done a comparison between a HSI and a predominantly white institution. And I can show you that while the raw numbers are very different, if you're a Hispanic woman, you're more likely to graduate with a computer science degree from the PWI than from the Hispanic Serving Institution as a percentage of Hispanic women's degrees. So you can, but you have to sort of just say, okay, wow, now that I can do this, what question do I want to answer? And how do I want to break down the population?
Okay, that is wonderful. And we look forward to your link. And Manuel?
Yeah, I want to add something because at my previous job, the CS majors came from engineering. We were not allowed to recruit, and we weren't part of the picture of acceptance into engineering. So our denominator is from the students in engineering. How well are we doing? At my current institution, they declare their major on the application and they come straight into our college. So our population now, it's the whole the freshman class of the university. How are we doing with that? And I think that that is a realistic difference between the two. But if we use the right denominator, then we can have a reasonable comparison, right? I mean, are you attracting women from the engineering pool, given that they might be limited because they don't get into the College of Engineering or whatever, versus are we attracting them from the whole campus population? We have 55% women on campus. So the sky's the limit for us here. Whereas at my previous job, engineering was the limit, and that had another set of issues. So I think it's depending on what you're trying to compare your apples to oranges that dictates the denominator.
Okay, okay, thank you. So that's very helpful. I also, and let me just check too, if there are any additional comments before I go to the next question. And I just want to add some, I'll ask another question. So feel free to start with the raising hands if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going. But let me just ask this next question. And that is, it has to do with intersectional data. And so when you get to intersectional data, in some cases, for some degree programs, the numbers can be small. And by that, I mean less than 10. And so how do you handle the small numbers with intersectional data? Do you worry about the privacy? But yes, if you can comment on the intersectional data.
So let me take that question because it comes up a lot with the schools that we work with. And mind you, our original mandate when we got our funding from our seed investor, which was Pivotal Ventures, was to work with schools that graduated 200 or more computer science graduates per year. And even then we had small numbers in some intersectional groups, primarily in Indigenous peoples. And, at first we thought about lumping them together so that we could show what was happening as a group, and it was ridiculous. It didn't make any sense. And then our data, by the way, each school's data that is in our system is only viewable by us and the school. Nobody else can see it. I don't think there's as much issue around privacy around what your demographics are based on like who's taking the class and who's majoring, but on what your outcome in the class is highly sensitive. And so we have chosen not to display any data if N is fewer than 5 for privacy. We can argue about whether 5 was good enough, but again, the schools are submitting the data so they know what the data is, and they're the only ones looking at the data, and they have control over who can see the data at their school. So we left it up to them, but we felt like if you have fewer than 5, like the ways that you can look at the data with percentages don't make any sense anymore.
Right.
I would argue that when you have very small numbers, it can be really hard to look at things over time. So one thing it can be very hard to look at things in 1 year. So another way to do it is to aggregate over time and say for this 3-year period, and then that next 3-year period, what happened is another way that you can handle this issue. But that it's also equally important when you have small numbers of people to not single them out in any way where they're being presented. Like, you're at a faculty meeting and someone's presenting the data and saying, look, we're failing the one student of this intersectional line. That is just not okay. So, you have to aggregate in some way, but I find aggregating over intersectional identity to be more troublesome than aggregating over time.
Okay, that's a really good point of aggregating over time, because then you leave the intersectional identities intact and not grouping, and you can see possibly some trends with that aggregation.
Yeah, and you can even do it as a smoothing. I know you're an electrical engineer originally, or a computer engineer, because I know exactly what you can use a smoothing filter if you want to get really down in the weeds of this. Sorry.
Yeah, yes, because see, I went to undergrad at Purdue, and Carla was a faculty member at Purdue, so we.
And way back in the day, although I believe you were finishing your PhD right as I started. So
Right.
I didn't have the pleasure of teaching you, but yet I digress.
Yes.
And,
Oh,
I-
oh,
and I
I
would
see
just say, for,
another boiler up. Yeah. Juana.
and, I would just say that in the app that we built, it's totally based on iPads data. So we don't worry about it at all. The schools have reported it to iPads. We've just pulled it out. So anything we present to you, you could go into Table Builder at the iPad site and suffer a lot to get that same data. So we're just making it easier to collect it. And all the analysis we do is cohort based. And if you wanted to do that directly from iPads, you'd have to do a whole lot of work. But it's all public data, so we don't worry about anything.
And I'll add one quick thing. I mean, the entropy measures capturing one number, your distribution of how diverse you are. So if you have numbers that are that skewed, then don't break it up, but calculate entropy intersectionally. And hopefully over the time, you'll see it trickle up until a point that you can go, oh, we got more than 10 in each bucket. We can now break it apart. So
Actually, we didn't look at this, Manuel, but we could do the conditional entropy so that you can get performance in classes based on intersectional identity in a way where nobody's identified. I didn't think of that. New paper.
It is. Okay, so the entropy can give you that without going into detail about each, each intersectional group or each, whatever group you want to have. So,
of the whole group, how evenly divided the whole group is. So if there's a group with only one student, the entropy number will be way low, but you won't know which group has one student.
so here's a question, and let me just see if there are hands raised. But I want to ask this question because this relates to the entropy, and that is, so when you're looking at entropy and you're looking at the Shannon equality index, you're looking at, how equal, as if you're going to have an equal distribution among the different groups.
Right.
But the reality can be, if you look at demographics, let's just say based on census
Right.
or based on those who go to college, that you don't have an equal distribution. So a question that comes up with the Shannon Equality Index, can that be modified such that you're looking at how close are you to, let's say, the demographics, if you're a state institution, because sometimes this comes up, how close are you to the demographics of the state? Or how close are you to the demographics of the students that go to higher ed? Um, just to ask that question as well.
I mean, that is an excellent question. We actually struggled with that one forever. There's a figure in the paper that I didn't present here, figure 13, that shows the Jensen-Shannon distance, and that is a distance between two distributions, and that is exactly what that measures. It says, how far is the computing degree distribution across whether it's gender or race or intersectionally from the campus-wide distribution? And the bigger the distance, the bigger the opportunity gap, so to speak. So there are metrics that will get that. We didn't get to go too deep into that, but the Jensen-Shannon is one, and there's a chart in the paper. I think we did it only for 1 year. That would be a good one to do, where you plot the distance, and you would assume the distance will be getting to zero if your distributions are getting similar. And that's another metric that includes in the calculation the size of the population. So the Hispanic population growing like crazy in some institution won't skew the numbers, because you're still going to look at the difference between however many Hispanics are getting CS degrees versus Hispanics getting campus degrees. And it doesn't matter that they're high or low.
Right. And that's a way too that goes back to a possibility of the entropy-based metrics. Maybe is that a way to have some context, institutional or state, to look at that distance?
Yeah, I think exactly what Manuel said. So if you look at the graph that I presented, that's a snapshot. but it doesn't tell you over time, is it getting better? Whereas then you can plot what the divergence over time. So you can look at it in a snapshot way, but then you can have an overall metric to see, is that opportunity gap, closing, meaning you're doing a better job at matching the distribution of the population from which you can draw computer science students.
Okay, okay, this is really good. So I do have another question that's come up, but I want to take a moment because sometimes a minute is needed to see if there are questions from our audience. So let me just check on the hand raising here in terms of the questions. Okay, then I'm going to continue with my questions. Thank you.
I have a question, but I can't
Oh.
find my little raise the hand thing.
Oh, okay. Come on, Patty, please.
Yes, hello.
Patty?
So one of the things that I always worry about is like we group Hispanics into like all different types of Hispanics into this and one of the things that I think we always overlook is the local Hispanics, right? The ones that are like first generation, second generation, third generation. Is there a way to measure that?
Not without survey data.
Right.
And the other thing that we're not able to do is we can get like Pell and transfer status from the universities, but we can't get it by individual student. However, this is all maybe going to change. So the National Student Clearinghouse, which is a nonprofit entity that is whatever university sends their data to say who's full-time and who's not full-time in order to make sure that there's no fraud in government grants, has just recently been given a gift by Science for America. We have been working on them. I'm on the advisory board for that. We have been working on them for 4 years. They have this post-secondary data program, which gives you everything de-identified, but you can track a student, not who it is, by everything over time in a university, even across universities. And the thing that was missing to make this useful was that they were coding students when they came in with a major, but they would never change it. Even if the person graduated in a different major, they are now doing the work to change this, which means that every university that puts their data into this can just do anything they need to do to be able to see every, this intersection of not just race, ethnicity, and gender identity, but also whether they're a Pell grantee, whether they're a transfer student. Patty, it doesn't get at what you're saying because until our government decides that, for example, that there isn't this monolithic group called Asian and this monolithic group called Hispanic, the only way you can do it is through survey data. And in my personal opinion, survey data is best handed out while they're required to be in class. Otherwise, you get a distribution problem as in terms of who fills out surveys and who doesn't. Personal opinion,
Yes.
not shared necessarily by my
Let me add, in terms of the metrics, Patty, yes, I mean, if you have the data, instead of doing intersectional, you could take just the Hispanic data and do nationality or, born in the country versus immigrated or whatever different, there's like a million different ways of slicing us into groups. So in terms of the
Are you
metrics,
referring
you
to the
could.
iPad data? You mean the iPad data? No.
No, the IPES doesn't have that like Carla's, but I'm
I haven't
saying
even
like,
caught up with non-binary yet.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and the other thing I would add in this is that the piece that's also very hard to figure out is the Higher Education Research Institute. It's really hard to get their data because one of the things I want to really do is look at the demographic, the cohort analysis of intent to major,
Mm-hmm.
then what happens when they graduate 4 years later. And that I think would give us a very interesting picture of what's happening once they go through the 4 years and how it changes the picture.
And we might get that through the National Student Clearinghouse, but it costs $4,000 for each university to participate in this program.
Right.
And so, and they have to agree to have their data be looked at publicly. But within a university, you can be looking at that if your university decides to do it.
Right. So, and here's one question related to this discussion too, and that has to do with first generation. And
Yeah,
that many, is that coded in the system? And yeah, I didn't think so, but I think many universities are starting to have, programs for first generation students. Because it's so critical in terms of navigating the undergraduate degree program, in terms of knowing that everybody flunks a class. And if you flunk a class, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be in the major, and things like that. So do you think, there'll be movement toward having that? So,
not in iPads. I don't think there's gonna be any movement in iPads. As fast as the US Census moves, is how fast iPads is gonna move.
but what do you think about the National Student, the
And
clearinghouse?
I don't know if they have that coded in there, they may, but I think it's incredibly relevant. And I would say that in the work the CIC does, if we look at what are the most important factors toward how well people do and whether they persist, the number one factor is prior experience in computing, which is correlated with economic privilege, period. Now, what else economic privilege is correlated with? It's a sad feature of the United States, and most countries, but it is the number one thing that has to do with whether people persist or whether they even try computer science. But being first gen is so relevant. We had students, we ran a first gen panel at Northeastern. We had students who thought office hours were when the faculty wanted to be alone, and that Dean's List meant you were in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and another factor, just to be a little dystopian for a minute, but as bigger universities adopt these predictive analytics systems for both admissions and retention, what they're trying to do is increase overall retention by then using these systems to steer students to places where they'll be successful. And that is having we believe, a pretty significant impact on students of color majoring in STEM.
Mhm.
So, one thing I think everybody should do who's at a big school is find out, is your school using it? And in what ways?
And are
Because
the advisors then saying, poor baby, maybe you should go do this other thing?
I know. That's really sad. Yes. So I know we're close to time, and I want to give each of our panelists an opportunity for concluding remarks. So with that, I'm going to start, and I'm going to do the random. So I'm going to start with Carla, and then Manuel, and then Valerie.
One of the pleasures of my life has been collaborating with these two. We all miss our monthly calls. So it's been really, really fun to get these different perspectives. I guess what I would just say is that I'm really, really happy that Valerie did the original work, and then that she brought Manuel and I in to do more work on this. And that anyone who's at all interested in anything going on in the Center for Inclusive Computing that wants to talk to me, I am so happy to help any university think about, how do you look at your data? How do you think about things? So just no matter what your size is, if you're interested in having a conversation with me, I've done 50 all-day site visits at 54 different universities in this country. And there is a myriad of ways that the faculty can put up institutional barriers towards the equitable discovery, persistence, and graduation in computing in this country. And I'm really happy to talk with you. But let me turn it over to the two brains of the operation.
Okay, Manuel.
My message is to keep looking at the data. I think for the reasons we showed today, some of the metrics that we've been shown are conveying the wrong image. And the moment population shifts happen, and even the small n, when you use entropy, the small n doesn't matter. If your numbers are not moving, your distribution of degrees is not changing. So I strongly encourage to continue slicing the data and looking at the different numbers. It doesn't give you the answer, but it tells you where the problems are. It says, look, we're putting all this effort and things are only not changing for this group, or like Carla showed, what's going on with Latinas at an HSI? Why aren't they studying computing? That's a very specific problem that you could probably come up with programs to target very, very narrowly, but you can't do that if you don't take your data and analyze it in multiple different ways.
Thank you. And Valerie, to wrap us up?
Not much left for me to say. Okay, first of all, I'm just going to say Carla was too modest, because really what happened is I got this message from her saying, Manuel and I have been talking, and I get what you were saying in your old paper, and we have to write a paper, and can you talk to us in 15 minutes? And that's really how it came to be. Secondly, just, yeah, always think about the denominator. What's the group you're trying to understand? And third, if you use the app, and I hope people will, it is very much always a work in progress. And I'd love feedback, especially if you run into bugs. I'm just gonna put it out there. And we're just really happy to have this opportunity, because we really want to get the word out. And I think all three of us would go anywhere to talk to anybody about thinking differently about this data.
Thank you. So to the three brains behind this is wonderful. And just to let everyone know, we will post the video on the Commanded website. And so we'll post it and note the video being available such that others can view it, and along with the citation to the paper. So I just have to say, I so enjoyed the paper, and I'm so glad that you three agreed to this webinar. It's just wonderful to see you, but even more so to hear about the work on the visualization of broadening participation and understanding entropy, and also the impact of the denominator. So with that, we'll conclude our webinar, and to say thank you to everyone for attending. So there's some notes in here, excellent and important talk. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was an honor. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.